Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Redefining Higher Education in the Age of AI, specifically the Language and Literature's the panel. I am honored to be your moderator today. My name is David, and we have a very interesting panel discussion ahead of us with three esteemed professors with diverse, expertise in their fields of language and literature, as well as policy making. Joined with us is also two brilliant student panelists who will also be sharing our experience towards the end of the panel discussion. I would like to introduce the professors, and one of them will be joining us very briefly. First, we have Professor Sid Dobrin. Sid is basically a chair of the Department of English in the University of Florida. He is the founder of the director of the Trans Innovation Initiative, and he has been named a digital thought leader by Adobe. He serves as a member of the Florida Institute for National Security, and he's also the author and editor of numerous books and articles, including talking about generative AI, a guide for education, educators, and AI, and writing. Sid, I would like to invite you to present with us whatever insights you have for us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for being here. It's a fantastic event. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that as I'm talking, we can get a little bit of visual accompaniment. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about today, because we're covering such a broad spectrum of AI and Gen AI and Gen Tech conversations throughout the conference, is I want to, well, you know what? First thing I want to do, actually, I want to share a short video. And this is a short video. It's about 17 seconds long. There is no audio, so don't think your computer is malfunctioning or anything like that. And I want to share it because this is sort of how I'm thinking about Gen Tech these days. So let me move through to this slide. Now, again, 17 seconds, no sound. This is how I'm thinking about Gen Tech. Right, so this sort of, the rules are up for grabs and we're not sure what rules we're playing with all the time. And the machine is sort of doing new things that we aren't anticipating. So I want to use that as sort of a visual metaphor about how I'm starting to think more and more about AI and Gen Tech in particular. Now, with that in mind, over the last 6 months, I've been visiting campuses all across the US and Australia, and I've been working with faculty and administrators, students, and we've talked a lot about the way that Gen AI is going to affect higher education. And as was mentioned in the intro, I've recently published a short resource called Talking About Generative AI, a Guide for Educators. And my new textbook, AI and Writing, is going to be released in just a couple of weeks. Now, the combination of working on these resources and delivering these talks about Gen Tech has generated a lot of conversation. And I generally try to approach AI in these conversations from two perspectives, from the perspective of conceptual AI and the perspective of applied AI. And what I mean by that is conceptual AI referring to how we think about the ramifications or the consequences of AI. Conceptual AI asks those questions about things like how AI might impact societies or economies or cultures. And conceptual AI stands sort of at the center of the questions we face about how AI will affect how we teach and learn. Conceptual AI takes up the ethical issues that surround AI's evolution and use. Conceptual AI focuses on questions of why or what if. Now, applied AI asks questions about how to use AI, both generically and specifically. Applied AI focuses on the practicality and the use of AI. And applied AI is the approach we use for developing new AI applications and for generating generative AI moving forward. Applied AI focuses on the questions of how. Now, as you might expect, part of what emerges in all of these conversations I'm having are both conceptual questions and application questions. And I keep a list of a lot of these very intriguing dynamic questions, and I plan to work on them as I continue to work on Gen Tech and to think about these questions. So today, though, I want to focus on one of those questions that came up recently in a conversation, because I think it's an interesting question in light of all of the conversation about Gen Tech as generative tools, especially in reference to Gen AI design and platforms that are designed to produce written text. And certainly the release of ChatGPT last November spawned massive conversations about how Gen AI might be used as a writing tool. But I want to flip that coin a bit today, and I want to think about the other side of that coin and pose some questions about how AI and Gen AI are affecting reading as well as writing. That is, we haven't talked as much about reading generally in the AI conversations as we have about writing, despite the fundamental importance of reading in education. So what I'm going to relate now today this is all designed to provoke some conversation and some further inquiry rather than provide any kind of key answers. After all, this is a roundtable and a conversation is the primary objective. So I want to think about reading for a moment. Now, certainly we can say that students have always looked for a way not to read the text we want them to read. Now, personally, I love the scene in the 1985 film Heaven Can Help Us when the brainy kid is helping the bully kid write the essay about David Copperfield, and he's absolutely flummoxed by the bully's continued reference to W.C. Fields because, as it turns out, the bully decided to watch the 1935 W.C. Fields movie version of David Copperfield rather than actually read the book. But we can point to the same kind of thing in Cliff's Notes and online summaries, Wikipedia, comic versions, and all of the other ways in which students try to find shortcuts to reading the text that we think they need to read. And we as teachers have asked them to prove that they've read these texts in question by writing about the text or answering assessment questions about the text, and that their level of engagement with the text would be evident to us in the writing or in the assessment as to whether or not they really read the text. Of course, in the age of AI, we have to question whether we can actually assess the degree of engagement anymore at all. And we have to ask, what can I detect in the writing or the assessment beyond what Gen AI does in the spaces where Gen AI can't go? So if a student asks ChatGPT, for instance, to provide a summary of David Copperfield or Moby Dick or Aristotle or whatever text we think students should engage, how in-depth can the Gen AI summaries be? And let's face it, when you have text like Moby Dick, how many people can talk about the book who've never read it simply because they've only ever engaged the summaries and they've gotten away with it? How then can ChatGPT provide depth enough about a text to operate as a stand-in for engaged reading? That is, if some instances, and by the way, I meant to switch to the David Copperfield, W.C. Fields slide there. So if Gen AI can provide writing in some context that is good enough to fulfill an assignment or another task, at what level does Gen Tech stand in as reading that is good enough as well? Now, for many readings, Gen AI can get students from point A to point B, give them a basic overview. But we as teachers, we know we want to push them to get to point C, to that more critical engagement, a deeper understanding of the text. Now, part of my interest in beginning to think about how Gen Tech and reading will further interact also grows from the growing number of platforms designed to aid students in reading and research. So consider, for instance, the Wordtune platform, which is currently beta testing an additional platform called Readtune that will allow a user to place PDFs or other copied documents into a folder, and then will use AI to, quote, read the text and respond to the queries posed by the user. It will summarize text, it will synthesize text. If you ask it to, it will read multiple documents and locate commonalities, find specific details in each document about a specific topic. For instance, you could place 12 articles about David Copperfield into WordRead and ask the AI to locate in those articles where the themes of coming of age are discussed, and then synthesize each of those in parts into a new text with or without citation. The writer thus can generate writing without ever having read the source materials that inform the writing. Now, this is more than scrubbing an LLM like ChatGPT's massive anything online about David Copperfield. It's a matter of selectively choosing what the data set will look like without having to actually read the source for that data set. And consider Anthropic's Claude AI, which now will, quote, read a book in under a minute. It's designed to decipher and communicate large documents like books without the user having to actually read the book. And frankly, I'm also interested in how these reading AI platforms will assist us in our own research as well. How efficient will it be for a researcher to simply place dozens of PDFs about a research topic into a digital file and ask the AI to read, summarize, and identify key or needed information in order for the scholar to include those in the text of their own work? Now, of course, we've talked about and we teach our students selective reading and different kinds of reading, but this changes that game quite a bit. And there's also a lot of connection here to consider regarding LLMs and bias, particularly exclusionary bias. But these are all big questions that we're just starting to touch on. So now, as we talk about Gen Tech and writing, we need to simultaneously talk about the flip side of the coin and how we're going to teach students to ethically employ AI to collaborate in the acts of reading as well. And I want to put that out there as part of how we're talking about AI, Gen Tech, and education in general. So that's what I want to throw out there today as part of this larger conversation.
Sorry about that, didn't realize. Thank you very much, Mark, Sydney, for that wonderful insight. The question Q&A is open for everyone who does have questions, and our staff would be able to go through those and send them to me so that they would be answered towards the end of the panel. But I would like to direct the Professor Mark and introduce him for the next part of the panel. So our second panelist is Professor Marc Watkins, who is a lecturer of writing and rhetoric, as well as the director of the AI Institute for Teachers at the University of Mississippi. He has been teaching for over a decade while pursuing research in OER, or Open Educational Resources, and Open Pedagogy as part of the WOW Fellowship. Some of his areas of expertise include artificial neural networks and machine learning, as well as digital humanities. He's also a writer and editor and has been published in over a dozen different magazines. Mark, if you would be able to show us and talk to us a little bit about what you think about AI and its impact on education.
Well, thank you, David, so much. And thank you, Sid, for talking about this. I think you've opened up the doorway to talk about large language models outside of ChatGPT and into other instances and affordances for us too. I'm going to share my slides here in just a second and kind of talk about what we've been doing here at the University of Mississippi. So let me go and start that process. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my slides. If not, just scream at me as loud as you can. But I kind of want to give everyone a little bit of a background. So I first became aware of generative AI way back in May of this year when a colleague of mine was using it in Portland with using not ChatGPT, but GPT-3 and using Jasper AI to use copyright. So I really became really sort of interested in it over the summer, and we came together in my department, the Department of Writing and Rhetoric, to begin looking at how these tools might actually help students well before ChatGPT was launched. So we actually had a pilot in place in August of 2022. And you can kind of see the members of our pilot here too. This is where we all had less gray hair in old pictures. But Dr. Robert Cummings, who's the Executive Director of Academic Innovation, my chair, Stephen Monroe, Guy Krieger, the Lecturer of Writing and Rhetoric, Andrew Davis, myself, and Angela Green were all part of this pilot. And we worked together to actually start thinking about how these different generative AI tools were going to affect student writing and reading process. And the DWR stands for the Department of Writing and Rhetoric. So we launched that pilot with the 6 of us. We've since grown that group in the spring of 2023 to 8 faculty members. And like I said, we wanted to determine what this technology did to the student writing process to see if it would help or hinder it. And we are IRB approved to collect student reflections. And oh boy, have we been collecting reflections from students. We now have over 100,000 words from students about their use of AI writing, research, and reading assistance, and what this does to their actual process. So we've got quite a bit of material to go through and to see how students are actually using this in their day-to-day lives. So in order to do this, we kind of had to set up some framework. And we designed an AI-assisted versus AI-generated writing kind of rules of the road way back in August, and we kept on updating it too. And you guys can scan the QR code, but there will be a link here that will give you access to this here in just a minute too, so you don't have to worry about that. But we wanted to focus on what would be acceptable versus not. And Bob Cummings, the executive director of Academic or Innovation Group, he proposed the following framework. After he'd done this for a while too, he's like, well, how are we going to call this? What are we going to call this? And so he suggested the DEAR framework, or the Define, Evaluate, Explore, and Reflect framework, about integrating generative AI tools within the student writing and reading process and research process. The first one is to clearly define the stages of the project and enumerate each stage's purpose in achieving a student learning outcome. Next step is to evaluate what AI technology you'd like to pair with that learning activity for your students. Then encourage your students to explore that AI technology for that stage without fear that they're going to cheat or anything else. And finally, give them room to reflect specifically about what that does to their actual process, both with some snap reflections and also some broader metacognitive reflection as well too. So that's the framework we used when we designed and looked at some of these tools I'm going to show you here in just a minute. In this sense, though, we think AI assistance is a lot like tracing. If you look at tracing and drawing too, it is how many of us learn how to draw. It's how I learned how to draw too, especially hands, which is kind of hilarious because AI image generators don't actually know how to draw hands or digits too, because they have issues with compositionality. But it also is a controversial thing. Many artists, even though they use tracing for part of their process, don't admit to do so because they feel like it might be cheating or might be accused of being a hack. I think it's actually important, though, because when we think about when we trace something, we get into a conversation of what we're actually doing, bringing in a small bit of an image or a greater composition that makes it a little bit more clear how you're integrating this. But I think the debate is how much tracing is going to be too much. And obviously what's lost in the process of drawing versus tracing, same thing as what's lost in the process of generating material or offloading that to an algorithm versus learning it on your own. And those are some of the things and questions we begin to look at. And I'm just offering this as just an analogy to kind of frame what I'm going to show you here in the next few minutes. So we're going to look at some tools here quickly. So it's very important to also keep in mind that ChatGPT is basically a chat-based interface. It's not really designed as an assistant. It's framed mostly as a text generator with very little human writing involved outside of the prompt. It can be overwhelming for many students to use it as a writing assistant in that sort of manner. And you need a great deal of patience to learn how to use it because it does require prompt engineering to do so. So for a lot of intro students, especially the first year freshman students too, it's very overwhelming to use it for anything other than just saying, here, write an essay for me. That takes a little bit of time and energy too. So we looked at some tools outside of ChatGPT that still use generative AI. One of them is ELICIT. And on the right here, you have a screenshot of the brainstorming research question activity that we launched in the fall. In this case, we wanted to look at a pain point in the student writing research process, which is many of them really struggled to come up with really good, solid research questions. And ELICIT not only has a really great research engine that's using generative AI, they also have subtasks, in this case, brainstorming research questions that can then be used as the actual source for your search string. As you can see here too, I just typed in Uber and taxi services, and it lists a number of different sub-questions and main questions that students can use. Well, we designed an assignment about this to see if this could help the students pass that process in the research paper too, and many of them really loved it. One of the reflections here too, one of the students said, my initial reaction after typing only 2 words was, wow, I never thought of that. ELICIT helped me see more questions about my topic that I would never have thought of. ELICIT has helped me formulate my writing by using parts of the questions that relate to my audience. So really good, powerful tool. But again, going back to that analogy of tracing, how much assistance is too much in this situation too? We've got them past that pain point of the research paper. Do we then invite students to use that technology further going forward? It's a big question. But we also looked at other tools as well too. In this case, we worked and partnered with a company called FERMAT in Barcelona. And we built some counter argument tools because a lot of our students not only struggle with research questions, they really struggle with counter arguments, right? Looking at opposing sides and that sort of thing too. And this tool was built by Max Drake, who's one of the engineers at FERMAT. And it's a counter argument generator too. And it's also really wild for students because it's not a linear sort of experience. It takes place on a spatial canvas. And for many students, that's a very different way of thinking of things. So I'm going to play this short video. It doesn't have any sound to it at all. But the box with text in it right now is human-based writing. The pink box that says keyword finder is going to be generative AI. Same thing with the summarizer and the well actually, which will be the counter argument. And it's sped up and going pretty quickly, but you can kind of see what this looks like in action. So once you drag those boxes over there, it updates in real time, offering some real world feedback for your writing. Now, this has some great benefits because it give a writer immediate support to what's going on with their actual research and writing process. But it also is connected to generative AI, meaning there's no off switch. You have to actually talk to your students and say you have to pull that away. Otherwise, you're going to get an infinite number of counter arguments, no matter what your argument is too. And FERMAT was a little bit challenging for a lot of our students to use. This one reflection, I think, captured that pretty well. It says, I was able to use the counter argument and rebuttal for a body paragraph. I also used it to write my first thesis, but ended up changing it to a better one. I was not able to figure out how to use FERMAT for much other than that, though, because I found it frustrating to use at times. Again, that's more of a user interface issue there, too, than anything else. But I do think that the tools we tried, that FERMAT and that sort of version of this, too, was more of a struggle for them than a help for that fall semester. But we did switch, and Sid's already mentioned this tool. It's called Wordtune. We switched to Wordtune in the spring, specifically Wordtune SCISPACE, which is designed to do very small generative AI calls to your actual writing assignment too. And it's built in almost like a Google Doc. So it's a much more familiar experience for them to work at. So I'm just going to play you this lovely little video that shows you what this looks like in action from Wordtune. And you can see the cat.
Say you're writing a blog post about the future of hybrid work. You wrote one paragraph about the importance of in-person interactions at the office, and now you're stuck. Introducing Wordtune SCISPACE, a new super tool that will help you write easier and faster. Click plus and open a menu of different spices you can add to your text. Let's say a statistical fact about how in-person interactions elevate productivity according to a recent MIT study. Facts are based on real sources that you can check out with the provided links. Want comic relief? Had a joke about not wanting to miss out on all the free snacks at the office. Next, choose counter argument to add a few sentences about the importance of working from home as well. Then keep writing, adding your own personal perspective. This is what the future of writing looks like. And the future is basically here. Wordtune SCISPACE is powered by cutting-edge AI technology, and it's only here to help when you need it. We believe humans are, and always will be, the best writers on the planet. Cats.
Interesting way to market that. So students really did like that tool a lot better too. They used it when they needed it, when they reached a point in their process when they're writing to where they became stuck, and they only engaged with it in that manner. One reflection here.
Say you're writing a blog.
Sorry about that. The cat keeps talking. It says, I used it at first to help word things that I wasn't sure about how to write, and I found it extremely helpful. I do not feel like I depend on it so much, but it was helpful to lean on and back on it when I was stuck in a concept. So again, going back to that framing analogy of using it as a tracing tool too, when you come to a part where you're not comfortable with it, to engage with it as needed is kind of what we're looking at pedagogically for this. So that was Wordtune SCISPACE. And then we also have a reading assistant. There were two really great reading assistants that came online last year. One was Explain Paper and the other one is SciSpace. SciSpace was this really great, almost like research engine that uses generative AI a lot like ELICIT does, but also has a reading assistant for open access journals too. This video also doesn't have any sound with it too, but you can kind of see it. What happens is that you identify a portion or a passage from a PDF, and then it translates that into natural language that you can then chat with off to the side too. It is also multilingual, so you can change it around from English to whatever your native language is too to help with it, and go into that sort of space as well too. This tool overall was very popular with most all the students that actually used it. One of the students that actually shared their reflection, I'll share with you here in just a second. Students said, I've always struggled with reading comprehension because of my learning disabilities. So using an app that analyzes the paper is very helpful for me. And the process of shortening down a reading to an understandable paragraph definitely helped me understand the main claims of each section of the reading. So really good, really helpful. But just like we're trying to teach students critical reading skills, we're also trying to teach them critical writing and reading skills too. We don't want them to offload all of that to the AI just when they actually need it, which is going back to our tracing analogy. The last tool I'll show you is from OTTER AI, which is using OpenAI's Whisper platform to do speech recognition. This is just a screenshot too, to look at this as well from a video that I recorded from some of the training materials I did during the summer. But it allows users to record notes, lectures, meetings, and converse with the transcript using natural language, which could be amazing if you're having a situation where you're trying to compile notes and build up and synthesize what past lectures have been too. It could be immensely helpful for students with disabilities, could just be immensely helpful for people in general too. It's one of the tools that I use all the time when I look at past lecture notes and past recordings as well too. So just to read a brief recap, we think AI assistants can be really helpful to students too, but it's going to be controversial. It needs to set up clear boundaries with students and teachers. And teachers and students need to understand benefits and limitations of the technology as they explore it ethically. We're all going to need information in AI literacy going forward, and that's going to be kind of the big push here, I think, in the fall and in the spring semester for this next year. With that in mind, I did develop a professional development course about AI literacy for educators. That's for K through 12, higher education, and administrators. It's all about AI literacy, AI assistance, and AI aptitude. So all the tools that you've seen here too, I have many videos about 5 to 7 minutes long too, along with some student reflections and assignments loaded within there as well too. And it includes the videos, activities, and assignments. And I've been able to donate 300 scholarships for the attendees today for the AIX participants. And I think David can go ahead and release that to the chat, and it will also be included into the back mail or the back conference material as well too.
Thank you very much, Mark. So yeah, Mark's resources have also been shared to the webinar chat to everyone. So for anyone who is interested, definitely feel free to check that out. And I do want to invite our last speaker today, Professor Lance Eaton, who is the Director of the Faculty Development and Innovation at College Unbound, a part-time instructor at North Shore Community College, and a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a dissertation that is focusing on how scholars engage in academic piracy. He has given talks, written about, and presented at conferences on pedagogy, hybrid flexible learning, and finally on digital service learning. His musings, reflections, and ramblings can also be found on his blogs, which would soon be shared down in the webinar chat. I understand, Lance, that you're also involved with policymaking. So if you could share a little bit of your insights with us.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and frame a little bit of this as, I will probably just share a bit about what we have done at College Unbound around figuring out or approaching generative AI, and then move into a couple different thoughts throughout this process and throughout kind of both in my own research, my own looking at it at my campus and the like, to discuss that. So first, I'm just going to talk about what we did at College Unbound, because I think it was something that's been really powerful and that other institutions will want to look for pathways to do. So first off, College Unbound is a accredited 4-year institution in Providence with affiliate with other instances in Philadelphia, Chicago, and Newark. We focus on adult learners, particularly students who have stopped out at other institutions. And we work with a curriculum that really does center the student voice and student choice within how they approach their education. So when generative AI popped up on the scene in like last December, we really had to try to figure out what is this going to look like for our students. And so one of the more smarter insights that I can say I've had in my life was I was like, we need to actually run a course on AI in education. And so we actually ran that course twice in the spring semester. And the goal of the first course was for students to learn about generative AI and its relation to education, and then think about what should a policy at College Unbound look like. And so they crafted a policy. And then in session 2, with some of the same students and some new students, they test piloted that policy to really try to figure out, does this feel right when we actually apply it to assignments? And so they did that, and then after which the faculty have had a chance to look at it, review it, give feedback, and we are just at the cusp of implementing it for the fall semester. And I will share that link after this talk. So that was a really big piece for us of really making sure this conversation was with students and not about them. Something I've worked a lot and thought a lot about is just how quickly we are to talk about students and not with students. And so this conference was just like, when I started, it was like, yes, like this was amazing. This was so cool to see students saying, actually, we need to be part of the conversation. And that's a lot of the way we think about teaching and learning in our courses at College Unbound. But the thing I want to kind of just talk about in certain observations and things that I'm trying to weave through, think about, and guide faculty on is, first is like, I hear a lot of conversations, or a lot, like I hear the analogy of the calculator. And I like to think of like, this is not the calculator moment. This is the written language moment. And going back to Plato and the critique of when we move from oral tradition to written tradition, right? We went from writing as accounting to writing as storytelling. And I think that's some of what we are trying to figure out is what role does generative AI, instead of writing back in the time of Plato, like what role does that play, and how do we think about it? And, I think one of the challenges within that is that there's a lot of, and we've seen it already, like there's a lot of like, what's that right balance? For me, and when I think about particularly my students who, as I said, are typically older, we have a lot of multi-language learners, students with different disabilities, like there's ways that I see generative AI as like opening up the hidden curriculum of the world, not just of the college, but of the world. And, one of the best examples I always go to with that is the cover letter. I think the cover letter is one of the most like rhetorically obnoxious pieces of writings that we all have to do. And I say that as somebody who's pretty decently good at them, but recognize how ridiculous they are, because you have to do all of these like acrobatics in a particular way to please this employer, this person you have no clue about. And you do all of these things in relation to applying for a job that more times than not has nothing to do with writing a cover letter. And so when I think about people who are multi-language learners, when I think about people who are neurodiverse, like there's ways in which this just feels like we want you to, like it's all performative. And so that's like, as I think about what generative AI does, it gives an access into that. But it's also, me personally, like I have been really appreciative of it, of like working with it through things like theory and analysis. And I say this as somebody who teaches literature. I say this as somebody who like does these things of, it is still sometimes hard for me to get certain theories, or like if I had this early in my life, there would have been a lot less books that I had to read, but there would have been a lot less ways I would have had to try to understand the books that I was reading. Like it took me 8 years to read one of Foucault, History of Sexuality, right? Like, and it's not because I wasn't trying, but it was just a way, like the inaccessibility of it. And so there's ways that I think that's really awesome. I think there's, the value is there. The flip side of that is like the practices around these tools and the ways that they're working is like, there is this pull of like homogeneous linguistic practices. And I think about it in relation to what I would call like the spell check effect, right? When we were all, as we moved to computers, it became standard practice expectation that everybody does spell check and grammar check. And if you didn't and I saw this, and I certainly as an instructor have done this of like, how could you not just press that button? Right? Like there's this overwhelming expectation of this is how you do it. And I think as, when I talk about something like the cover letter, there's a way in which our increased usage of this is going to normalize a particular type of, in this case, English language that is like, that pulls away from the larger diversity of ways in which language can be dynamic and evolve. And so that's a piece of this that I get concerned about, again, because of how much the large language models that are being used, like who is, as we've seen in other research, like who represents or who is represented, who is not represented in those models. And then the final piece, and this is, I think, what we're all grappling with, and it's a piece I'm trying to like put my hands around, is this really feels like a we're gonna have to like both figure out what our darlings are and which ones we need to kill, to really butcher a phrase from was it Ginsberg? Probably wasn't, but this idea of, like, what are the absolute things we need to make sure students know? And what has me thinking about this is like learning for us is still very much a black box. I don't think we always fully appreciate that like when we look at the research around learning science and things like that, like there's never 100% of students can effectively learn through this style or that style. It's always a mixture that is always in context of where that learning takes place. And so there's so many things that we don't understand about it. And so we create these courses with these objectives and these ways of trying to make learning happen. And those objectives, those things that we think we are teaching, or those things that we think are, need to be demonstrated, within them there's all sorts of subsumed things. There's assumed values, unspoken skills, and supposedly normalized practices. And so as we start to use and introduce generative AI into that learning experience, we're going to discover like there's some things that were embedded in these models, these old objectives that we didn't account for, that are probably also important. And we're going to have to find ways of realizing that, and then also reintegrating or finding other ways of making sure those fit into the ways that we're teaching and learning, really at all levels. But I'm thinking particularly, obviously, at the college level of how we just miss things that we always think are present, and then once they're not, or once we've changed the larger thing, it has that cascade effect. So that's really all I wanted to share. I wanted to kind of keep it a little bit short, given that we make sure we have time for everybody else. So that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Lance. So thank you to all three of the professors who shared their keen insights. And I do want to introduce two of our student panelists now. Chinat Yu, Chinat, is a master's student who is currently working, if I'm not mistaken, at Microsoft. And the other one is Maya, or Mashiko, who is also currently working. She's pursuing her bachelor's degree, if I'm not mistaken, and also works with a company who is like doing organization, currently making up with like AA policies. So I do want to open up the floors to both of our student panelists and ask them what they thought about our professors' presentations, if there are anything key takeaways you had, or anything you want to like present and tell them about, especially from a student's perspective, because a lot of this was, targeted at teaching the students. And is there any discrepancies you've realized or noticed while listening to these presentations? China, if we could start with you.
Sure. I think that, definitely as we continue to navigate this landscape, I think earlier, Marc's presentation showed us a plethora of potential tools as students obviously navigating and understanding how these different tools would potentially compete and win out against each other. It continues to be an exciting time. And I think part of the question that I think that I would love to ask the professors here to explore is to understand whether or not you think that students should be actively finding new tools, or whether you think that students should potentially defer to tools that you guys have already kind of played around and play tested already.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mashiko, if you have anything else to add, because if I'm not remembering correctly, you do have experience with making policies.
Yeah, I was really interested in all of your presentations. Thank you very much for that. I was really curious about what Professor Marc said about gathering around 100K student submissions about how they use ChatGPT for writing, or just the AI tools, which is so interesting in crowdsourcing these opinions. I would really love to see what they have, what conclusions they make out of it. And also, I found it, I was kind of curious, as Professor Sid started with this analogy of not knowing the rules of the machines. And I was wondering if that personally induces fear in them, or it's more curiosity. Or do you think people should be frightened of these tools and what impact they might have right now?
I would love to talk about that, particularly given what Mark and Lance said. You know, Mark and I have similar backgrounds in rhetoric and composition, and Lance in English. And not even a week ago, MLA and 4Cs released this statement on generative AI and writing instruction, which I find absolutely terrible, because it basically says we should not allow our students to use generative AI in any way, shape, or form. And to answer your question, Michiko, it's not a matter of being afraid. It's and also Chinat, yours about should we find, I want our students trying platforms we haven't tried before. I want them experimenting. I want them not to be afraid, but to be intrigued by this. Because if we're just going to pretend that the old methodologies are somehow the right way to learn, we've given up. I mean, if you want to apply those methodologies in new contexts, that's fantastic. But yeah, I don't see it as fear. I see it as saying, you know, we're going to think differently about things. You know, Lance mentioned, you know, the shift from orality to literacy, and this shift from literacy to electracy, or what we mistakenly call digital literacy. We've got to push forward in that. And if we just decide we're going to keep doing it the old way because we're afraid, that's not good education.
That's a great answer. I do want to bring in, I did have a question specifically about the use of AI reading. I think Sid, you talked about that. What do you, and also this came after Mark's presentation as well. You guys talked, specifically Mark, you talked about a student with a learning disability using the AIs, and it kind of like brought me to how can you guys navigate creating the policies, particularly for students who need who will be greatly impacted by, for example, like what Sid was talking about with like reading AI. For example, students with visual impairments or maybe learning disabilities. How would you guys navigate as educators creating the policy around that? Yeah, perhaps we could start with Mark.
Great, yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think to even approach a policy just on generative AI in general, not even reading assistance, things have to slow down a lot because educators have no real idea what's going on. I think some people have been talking about beforehand that Google has the demo of this too, where you can go to Google Labs, turn it on with your Gmail and open up a Google Doc, and there's a little magic wand with help me write. But most educators have no clue about that. They just think about generative AI as ChatGPT. They have no idea about reading assistance. They have no idea about the fact that you can use Whisper to transcribe speech recognition software too. They have no idea about that. So it's going to take them time to filter through and make those decisions. And really, it's going to be a discussion about what we want our students to use and hopefully have them as well too. Now that Microsoft is adopting this and Google as well too, we will see a lot of the technology kind of baked into the background processes like reading assistance. I don't know, I haven't had access to it yet, but I know Google's Notebook LM supposedly is like a reading assistant in many different ways. And so once those become more mainstream, we can have a lot more of those discussions. But, you know, for any type of policy too, it's going to be about exploring the tool too, thinking about what affordances it can have for your students, and try to do so in a place that's not coming from fear, but from one of wonder and exploration.
Absolutely. There is one question that has popped up in the Q&A, and I see that both Mark, you have answered, as well as Amy from one of our audiences, and it's how can panelists and educators like speak to using AI tools for their own work as opposed to students, whether it's like using ChatGPT to grade someone's English paper, for example. How do you feel like we can go around, for example, using these AIs potentially to help them grade faster, for example, or like, but also how to limit it in a way that makes sense for both students and the professors. If Lance, you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So one of the things when we created the policy is that it includes usage, not just for students, but for faculty, because it was really important that to consider that when faculty are using this, well, there's two pieces. One, if they're using it and putting students' work into it, like that violates all sorts of things around copyright. That violate, like that is taking student labor and basically giving it to, Open AI to mine to improve its product. And there's elements of exploitation of that. I am also like that idea of transparency and teaching or learning and teaching, I think is important. And it's an extension of an article I wrote a couple of years ago called the new LMS Rule: Transparency Working Both Ways. And that, for me, like anytime we want or we're going to put barriers around what students do, those barriers better be in place for faculty. Like if you are going to say students can't use it, but then you yourself are going to use it in any capacity, like you have to rethink what you're doing, or at least this is my very like clear, line in the sand of that's inequitable. That is a way of saying they are not ready. And again, I teach at a school where our average student is 37, yet at the same time, I would feel the same way if our average age student was 19. Of we are working with adults and they may be in different stages of adulthood, but we can't lord things over them. And if we're looking at why there's such disparity or such a larger disdain for higher education, that some of it is grounded in a very paternal or patronizing relationship between the instructor and the student. And so for me, it's around these things, we would want to make sure that like there's that parity. Beyond that, I am torn. I will be honest. There is on the one hand, like feedback is some of the glue of teaching and learning. And if we're going to take that out, it increasingly becomes what's the role of the instructor, right? Of that like person helping to navigate and mentor that person. On the other hand, in some things that I've seen and experimented with, there's places where it can provide better, and it also doesn't get tired. And what I mean by that is if you are grading 20 papers in a row, like the 2 or 3 things that keep popping up, like you get, for some folks, not everyone, you get more frustrated the further they go, or you get less frustrated. Either way, you respond to the student often differently. And so there's something there to be said of like, it can hold a little bit more neutrality in certain contexts.
Can I jump in real quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So I think, I completely agree with Lance, but I also think there is a question of context here too, a disciplinary context, because we're talking about generative AI specifically for turning out writing or talking about reading and text, but we forget that Gen Tech is also being used in every other discipline in terms of productivity and how we can use it for other kinds of research. Right, so the scientist who needs to have 20 proofs of concept in order to apply for a grant, and it's taken 3 months to do the first one, but can generate the next 19 in a couple of minutes and then come back. There's a different usage there than what we're talking about Gen Tech usage, or the example in the Kissinger book about AI, about the pharmaceutical industry and the research being done there and how it expedites the research. That's a very different kind of research use as an academic, as a scholar, as a researcher, than simply writing the introduction to a talk I'm giving or something like that. And so I think particularly as we're seeing the numbers of platforms expand massively, that we also have to think about the context where these things are taking place. And the other thing I would add to that also is particularly when we're talking about our students, we're talking about our research, a lot of this is coming down to proprietary LLMs too, and who's going to have access to what. And that context changes a lot of this conversation. And so I just wanted to add that to what Lance is saying, in full agreement with what he's saying.
Thank you very much to every single one of our panelists. It was a great discussion, and I feel like there's still so much more to be said on the topic of AI use, even after our conversations. So I would like to invite everyone to continue joining us for the rest of the conference. We do have a networking and brainstorming session at 2 p.m. in just around like 9 minutes, where we'll be continuing these conversations. And I really invite all of you to like reach out to one another and be able to talk in like one-on-one situations as well, because we do like can like help you with that. And finally, I do want to make sure that everyone knows that the recordings of all of the sessions will be out soon and available to all our participants. Thank you very much, and definitely hope to see you soon on our next event. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.